Hello, Gamecock fans. I'm Spencer Ball.
And I'm JP Barry. Welcome back to Ball Don't Lie, SGTV's premier live sports show.
JP and I will be giving you our weekly insight every Friday.
This week on the show, we're talking college football and women's soccer in South Carolina.
And in professional sports, we'll be giving you guys the scoop on the MLB World Series and the Carolina Panthers.
Also, be sure to stick around for week 3 of head-to-head college football pick'ems.
And without further ado, welcome to Ball Don't Lie.
Welcome to the Kennedy Greenhouse Studio.
I'm Spencer Ball.
And I'm JP Barry. When you get it all right, you can hear that and it just flies out of Founders.
An 18-year-old phenom, Gigi Jackson, has really turned his play up a notch. I'm almost 2 years older than Gigi Jackson. He's doing things I couldn't even dream of doing.
They're the Golden Gamecocks. They're just so much fun to watch. What a historic year for them.
This is Ball Don't Lie.
Coming off of back-to-back FCC losses, the South Carolina Gamecocks are looking to make or break their season against Texas A&M this Saturday.
Yeah, JP, not South Carolina's finest showing last week against Missouri by any means.
It was, quite frankly, miserable to watch, and I'm sure it's even more miserable to experience. As you can see, the Gamecocks, they are just quite atrocious defensively, but the offense was the no-show that I think surprised people the most. Against Mizzou, they were 3 of 13 on third down, 286 total yards, and the offensive line gave up 6 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 4 quarterback hits. Now, Mizzou's defense is pretty good at getting after the quarterback, but so is Texas A&M. They are tied for the nation lead in sacks, and they are also the #1 team in terms of tackles for loss. This is one of the worst matchups for South Carolina's offensive line, maybe ever.
Yeah, and it's just really easy math. One team, arguably the best defensive line in the nation, and our offensive line, arguably the worst in the nation. And I think it doesn't take much imagining to foresee how that one's going to go on Saturday.
Absolutely, and while Texas A&M's results are rather middling, as you can see there, their losses are on the road against a Miami team that's been in and out of the top 25, against Alabama, who is Alabama, and then on the road against a Tennessee team in Knoxville that's looking pretty solid. The ratings metrics really like the Aggies. They're ranking about in the top 20 in just about every single one, Sagarin, SP+, take your pick. So it's kind of a under-the-radar team in terms of quality going up against a South Carolina team that is very over-the-radar in their quality. But, of course, the one, kind of caveat is Mario Anderson's been playing pretty well recently.
He sure has. They've been able to do at least something in the ground game, which you couldn't say through the first few games, and he's definitely kind of showcased as that premier back for this Gamecock squad. And Spencer Rattler, he's still looking pretty good. There's just not much he can do behind that offensive line. But the problems with the Gamecocks definitely lie on the defensive side. As you can see on your screen, 114th in points per game allowed, 123rd with almost 450 yards per game allowed, and they get carved up. It doesn't matter that Texas A&M lost their starting quarterback, Connor Wegman, earlier in the year because Max Johnson might look like the best quarterback of all time against our defense.
Absolutely. Max Johnson, pretty good last year before he got hurt, pretty good at LSU. So it's going to be kind of him coming back into the fold for the Aggies here. And I mentioned those rating systems, and the ratings are not incredibly kind to South Carolina. I'll spare you all the gory details, but the Gamecocks do rate behind several FCS teams in some of those rankings. But, South Carolina, it's just a matter of how you're going to respond to the adversity. The Gamecocks, they need to go 4-1 the rest of the way to make it to a bowl game. You have the game against Clemson. You have the game here against Texas A&M. Going into College Station, a place where South Carolina has never won. Gamecocks picked up their first victory against the Aggies last year. And so it's just going to be about how Shane Beamer and company can recover from all the injuries, all the losses, and just even stuff outside the program.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really, it's tough to kind of pin the blame on one thing because so many things have just kind of not fell the right way for South Carolina this year. But having to go 4-1 the rest of the way to make a bowl game, and it's not looking too likely they're going to win this one on the road, but some of those home games in November don't do them any favors, hosting Kentucky, Clemson, and a bunch of other good teams. I mean, it's tough. Vanderbilt is going to be a scary game, and South Carolina fans probably don't want to face that fact.
Yeah, exactly. And, the team you didn't mention, Jacksonville State, their first season as a member of the FBS, and they're putting up a nice showing. They're looking like a real team. They're in the Sun Belt Conference. And so it's going to be a long offseason of introspection, I think, for the Gamecocks.
Absolutely, but they're not the only team in South Carolina. In the upstate, Clemson looks to conquer the Wolfpack as they travel to Raleigh to face North Carolina State.
Yeah, and as you can see, this is one of my favorite rivalries in all of college football. The Textile Bowl has been played nonstop for 91 straight years, and the 91st meeting is going to be this Saturday on the CW. You know, sandwiched in between like the Andy Griffith Show and The Flash. But as you can see there, it's been kind of a one-sided rivalry. Clemson 18-4 against the Wolfpack since 2000, but 3 of NC State's 4 wins have come in Raleigh, including 2021 when the Wolfpack took down Clemson in double overtime. As you can see, our little picture from when they rushed to the field after that historic win, and what ended up being a great year for the Wolfpack. But man, despite their records being similar, these are 2 very different teams, aren't they?
They sure are, and they're both, I would say, equally difficult to figure out. As Clemson should not be 4-3, but they sure are 4-3. As that loss against Duke, they outgained them in almost every single statistic. The loss last week against Miami, in the post-game interview, you see Dabo talking to Cade Klubnik. Apparently, he just was supposed to hand the ball off, tried to do something different. They lose that one in Miami. It's just a really tough team to figure out. And, as a stat we found last night doing a little bit of research, Clemson's offense had 282 yards on 11 plays against Miami, but their other 57 plays, they had just 63 yards. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, they're like Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like from one quarter to another. They opened the third quarter looking really nice. They took a 17-7 lead. Then they didn't build on it, and they let Miami hang around. And when you go down to South Beach and you're playing the Hurricanes, and they're a much improved program this year, you let that defensive front hang around. You can see there, they allowed 5 sacks and 10 tackles for loss against the Hurricanes. And the Clemson ground game, which has been a staple of their program, even back to the Tommy Bowden days, 0.9 yards per carry. And it's looking like Clemson's going to have to win out to continue try to continue their streak of 12 straight years of 10 or more wins for Dabo's Tigers. The last time they didn't win 10 games was the last time they started 4-4, that 2010 season we mentioned there, when they went 6-7, lost to South Florida in the Minky Car Bowl. Doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's just a classic rotating cast of bowl game names. But what you can say about both of these teams is they both have stout defenses. And that's, their offenses, they might be atrocious. You probably don't want to watch them. But if you love defense, the Textile Bowl is where it's at. As Clemson, they're just year in and year out, that's what you can expect from this team. They always seem to have a good front seven. And then someone in the secondary always gets taken in the first round of the NFL draft. It's just tale as old as time. But NC State, they've got a certain linebacker, JP, I know you're probably itching to talk about. Is it Peyton Wilson? Is that who it is?
Some guy by the name of Peyton Wilson. And for the folks at home, you saw there that NC State has played 7 football games this season. 7. Peyton Wilson has 81 tackles on the year in 7 games, which is an average of over 10 tackles per game. And as you can see there, they're facing stout competition. NC State, their
That's
3
more than
losses.
11 tackles per game. Let me do the math for you, buddy.
I'm not a math guy. But NC State, their 3 losses have all come against teams ranked in the AP top 20. You had number 14 Notre Dame, you had number 18 Louisville, and number 20 Duke. And the Louisville game was close. They were hanging around with Duke for a little bit. They hung around for Notre Dame for a half. But the one thing that holds the Wolfpack back, you mentioned their defense, and it is outstanding. Their offense is atrocious. They brought in Brennan Armstrong to pair him with offensive coordinator Robert Anae, and they had a great year together in 2021. I mean, Virginia was outstanding.
There were talks of Brennan Armstrong in a dark horse Heisman campaign in 2021, and now he's being benched for sophomore MJ Morris.
Yeah, MJ Morris, he came in relief last year after Devin Leary's injury, and he had some exciting plays, and he's just a young, very fun quarterback. He's a 4-star he's from North Carolina, so it's a bit of like a homecoming thing. But his play has been up and down. They faced some pretty stout defenses. So it's been a tough road for NC State, and it doesn't get any easier with Clemson coming to town. And they're just going to have to generate some more big plays. You saw there, 126th in the country in terms of plays of 20 yards or more. One thing working well for the Wolfpack is history. Dave Doeren, as the head coach of the NC State Wolfpack, has them 7-3 coming out of bye weeks. And they were off last week after they lost to Duke, a game where Duke's backup quarterback completed 4 passes in the Blue Devil win.
And Dave Doran, I feel like, always has the Wolfpacks at least ready to play in big games. It's rare you see them get blown out against quality opponents. So I think this one is definitely going to be close.
Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun. And staying in North Carolina, the NFL's Carolina Panthers are looking to turn around after an 0-6 start to the year. And here we can see it's a little bit more than just this game on Sunday. It's the Hall of Honor game, honoring two legends of the franchise, Julius Peppers and Musa Muhammad. Those two will be joining Wesley Walls, Jake Delhomme, and Steve Smith in that Hall of Honor for the Carolina Panthers.
And I know, JP, I know we got to see a lot of Julius Peppers' career, but we didn't get to see as much as Musa Muhammad, but these guys are just legends of the team. And, you know, thankfully, it might give the fans something a little different to think about than the team actually on the field.
Exactly. You know, I can't believe I forgot to mention offensive tackle Jordan Gross, who is the fourth member of that hall that Peppers and Muhammad will be joined. But yeah, Musa Muhammad, he was one of the first players in history for the Panthers, just drafted in their second year in 1996 in the second round. And he was there for their first great year in 1996 when they went to the NFC Championship game, played for the Panthers from 96 to 2004, left for Chicago for a little bit, went to the Super Bowl with them, and then came back for his final two seasons for some pretty good Panthers teams in the late 2000s. And so you can see there, it speaks for itself. Top two in history. We know who he's behind in terms of receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, but he is definitively, I think, one of the best Panthers of all time.
Oh, this is a much, much deserved honor for Musa Muhammad, but it's hard not to mention the guy to his left on your graphic. Julius Peppers, one of the greatest defensive ends in the league's history, 159.5 sacks on this career, and as you can see on that handy-dandy graphic, the only player in NFL history with 100-plus sacks and 10-plus interceptions. Just got a nose for the ball, huh, JP?
Absolutely. I mean, he is just one of, if not the greatest pass rushers of this kind of era. He made the 2000s Hall of Fame All-Decade team and the 2010s Hall of Fame All-Decade team. One of the few players in the NFL to make multiple decades of the All-Team. He was the 2002 Defensive Rookie of the Year, multi-time All-Pro, multi-time Pro Bowler, and he went out for the Panthers from 2002 to 2009. Had a little, you know, him and Musa Muhammad both went to the Bears for a little bit there, and then Pep switched sides in that epic rivalry, went to the Packers for a little bit before coming back to the Panthers for final 2 years. And obviously, you know, how can we mention Julius Peppers without mentioning that he was a star for the University of North Carolina?
He absolutely was. He was a star in college football, of course, but many people don't know that Julius Peppers was a dog on the basketball court. He was ridiculous and led that team deep in the March Madness run, and he was just bigger and more physical than everybody else. My dad loves talking about it. He's just like, oh, you've probably never seen him play basketball. I looked up some highlights. My goodness, it gets scary out there.
Yeah, he's one of the few players to have played in both the Super Bowl and the NCAA Men's Final Four tournament. And, you know, as you could see there on that graphic, that these are two of the best players on one of the best teams in Carolina history. They were both players on the 2003 Cardiac Cats Super Bowl runner-up team that went all the way and pushed Tom Brady's Patriots to a final last-second field goal. And Muhammad holds the record for the longest receiving touchdown in Super Bowl history, going 80 yards on an epic pass from Jake the Snake Delhomme.
And unfortunately, I think we were a little too young to remember that game. We've probably seen it on YouTube, seen the highlights, seen the heartbreak, as that's mostly, oh my goodness, English, mostly what Panthers fans know. Heartbreak.
Yeah, John Casey kicking it out of bounds. It's just an unfortunate run of things. But, you know, looking to the Panthers now as they're honoring these greats of the past, it's a team that has suffered, much like South Carolina, an unprecedented amount of injuries, especially on the defensive side of the football. A Panthers defense that was amongst the best in the NFL last year and had a great start to this year, but now everyone's hurt. And it's an offensive line that's been decimated by injuries. Although Austin Corbett has returned, that's going to be huge. And it's a bit of a shuffle at wide receiver and tight end with some injuries there at tight end and
some trade requests coming in. I mean, things are. They don't seem to be fully falling apart just yet, but they don't look the best.
Absolutely not. And the big key, of course, is that they've looked better in recent weeks. Bryce Young has been fantastic. Frank Reich shifting play calls over to the offensive coordinator Thomas Brown,
Thankfully.
who has been he was a great offensive coordinator out there and the play caller for the Los Angeles Rams. And so it's just going to be about getting better and doing a lot like the 2011 team with Cam. I think there's a lot of similarities there because that team started out dreadfully, and they built off of some nice performances in games they still lost. They started 1-5, so not that much different than this team. But they were able to put together some nice, great games. They were able to stack some W's against the schedule down the stretch. That's I think an early tell of how a rebuild's going, if you're able to stack together some wins down the stretch in year one, because it shows that the process is generating some pretty good results. And the Panthers' schedule the rest of the way seems pretty manageable.
Yeah, they've got a lot of opportunities to at least get that first win on the board. And one guy I want to give a shout out to, Adam Thielen, is just playing out of his mind. He seems to be the only guy doing much on the offensive end. Him and Chuba Hubbard, I would say, have been the two standouts on the offensive side of the ball. And it's just incredible seeing him kind of come back into his form. I wasn't sure how the signing would work out, but he's Bryce Young's man right now. But JP, we've got one final football story for you. Outside of the Carolinas, controversy strikes the Michigan Wolverines amidst allegations of a cheating scandal. JP, I know you're ready to talk about this, so I'll let you start it off.
Well, it is one of the wildest stories I can ever recall in my many, many years as a college football fan. And, it needs really no introduction because it's everywhere. It's being covered by almost every single outlet in the college football sphere, but also just the national sphere, as I get our lengthy notes, because this is a wild story. The man in question, as you can see there on that picture, Connor Stalions. Now, you may think that, probably went to Michigan. He loves Michigan. He was
cool last name.
Yeah. He's a Naval Academy graduate. He went to the Navy. He was a former United States Marine, and he's quoted as saying he got into Michigan and went to Naval Academy because of Bo Schembechler, the former Michigan great head coach. He's being looked into for traveling to opponents of Michigan's games and using videoing the other team in the stands and stealing their signs and giving them to Michigan's coaches so that they would know what plays are being called when they play those teams eventually. He apparently has had a network of spies that he has sent out to multiple different games during the week. And guess how he communicated this? Through a public Venmo account that he made no attempts of hiding what he was doing by literally saying football game, football emoji when he was paying people to go to these games, and people would pay him, reimburse him for the tickets. They were former Navy players that he had helped coach when he was at the Naval Academy. And it was other Michigan staffers. So it's not just him, but he's really kind of the ringleader. He's been nicknamed the SeatGeek Sniper with his propensity for grabbing tickets to these wild games. It came out that when last year's college football playoff ranking top 10 came out for the first time, he and his associates traveled to every single game of the teams in the top 10 to grab signs, except for one, Spencer. Who do you think that was?
I think do they wear purple, maybe black, known for a hypnotoad?
I do believe that their mascot is the little reptilian that shoots blood out of its eyes when it's attacked. It was the TCU Horned Frogs. And
How
of
fitting.
course,
That's justice right
they
there.
lost
Wow.
to TCU in the national championship game. And I kid you not, TCU knew ahead of time that this was going to be a problem. So they ran dummy signals on the sideline of the signs that Michigan had, because Michigan had ended up grabbing these signs anyway without going to the games. And so many are saying that Michigan's defense that was so great all year, there's a reason now that they kind of got torn to pieces, but it also envelops our Gamecocks, allegedly, because when Stalions and his minions went out to record teams in the top 10, two teams that were in the top 10 there, the Clemson Tigers and the Tennessee Volunteers. And the working theory and potential evidence that we have seen is that Stalions sent these signs to Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks to use in those games. No concrete evidence of that yet, but I felt it needed to be kind of touched upon because that's just how insane this all is.
And it seems to have completely just unraveled in like a week.
Exactly.
Like all of this has come out of complete thin air, at least for the average viewer. And unless you're one of his cronies, you probably wouldn't have known. But this is just such an insane story. It's so interesting. And JP, I think we should have known when Michigan started beating Ohio State that something was up.
Exactly. And, this Stallions fella is an interesting man, to say the least. We touched a bit on his past, but a bit on his...
He's got a novel, doesn't he?
He does, he joins former Michigan alumni Ted Kaczynski with his manifesto that he has written, doubly titled The Michigan Manifesto, a 550 to 600-page document detailing his plans to lead the Michigan football program to the glory after he evidently takes over for Jim Harbaugh. I don't know how he planned on usurping old Jimmy Boy, the khaki wonder, who's just Michigan royalty, but it's just... What in the world? People can you can like what sports you want, but I don't think there's a sport on this planet that has stuff as insane and as hilarious as college football, and this doesn't even involve anyone on the field.
You know what? I can't wait for a killer documentary to come out about this. This is just, it's going to be insane, but we're not done, but we are going to take a breather. We've been talking for far too long, and after the break, we'll catch you up on the MLB World Series and the NCAA Women's Soccer Playoffs.
The MLB Championship Series concluded this past week, leading us to a Texas Rangers and Arizona Diamondbacks World Series. They're going to kick off the Fall Classic tonight in Dallas in a game I'm so excited for. How can you not be romantic about baseball when you get some fun matchups like this after what has been, it started out kind of a sleepy postseason. It really ramped up there in the LCS.
It sure did, and for me personally, I love to see lower-seeded teams kind of punch their way up to the very tip-top of baseball. And talking about the Rangers, they finally got rid of the evil empire and the Astros in an epic 7-game series. The Rangers not losing a single game on the road this entire postseason and just demolishing Houston in the final game. And personally, I think every single baseball fan that doesn't pull for that funny little cheating team probably loved it.
Oh, I did. And I was so overjoyed. And, it really came off the back of not just their thunderous lineup, but some outstanding starting pitching. But the Rangers, they slugged 22 home runs over the course of this run to the World Series. And they had 3 players with great performances, but I really want to highlight Adolis Garcia. He had a 1.102 OPS in the ALCS, 17 hits, 7 of which were home runs, and a 20 RBI performance overall in this playoff run for Texas. And so I'm really excited. And, the Diamondbacks, who we will mention and more in depth here recently, but they slugged their way here too. And it really puts to rest, I think, the notion that you have to string together base hits or play small ball to win in October. Teams that out-homer their opponents since 2010 in Major League Baseball postseason games are 297-80. That's thanks to our friends over at Yankees Files on Twitter. But it's just been such a great postseason. But, we're talking about the offense so much. How about the pitching?
Especially, it's hard not to mention Gamecock legend Jordan Montgomery. And I don't want to say out of nowhere, but he's gotten red hot this postseason. He looks amazing. He had 2 wins in the ALCS and then came in a relief appearance in Game 7 and just locked it down. He's amazing. They also have Evaldi. I mean, the Rangers, they loaded up that lineup. They loaded up their rotation. And they're in the Fall Classic, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're doing this without Jacob deGrom, who was outstanding for them at the beginning of the year before he sadly got hurt. Montgomery was traded from the Yankees to the Cardinals last year, mostly because the Yankees thought he couldn't pitch in the postseason. And boy, has he proved Steinbrenner and Cashman wrong there.
Who's on the couch and who's playing
exactly
playing for their first title in franchise history.
And so, you mentioned Evaldi. He had 28 strikeouts so far in this postseason. He really worked some high-wire tightrope acts, escaping from some jams against that Arizona lineup to keep him in games. And, probably the pitcher we haven't even mentioned, Max Scherzer, has struggled heavily in the postseason, but he put together a gutsy performance at the beginning of Game 7 to turn over the keys to Monty and that Rangers bullpen that was much maligned throughout the regular season, but has turned it up a little bit here in the postseason, including Aroldis Chapman who had a lot of nightmares there in Houston and was able to quell some of those, and also sent a 104-mile-an-hour fastball into Chas McCormick's leg. So, he's
justice, I think they call that. I'm not positive, but another thing we should mention about these teams, how about the rookies? We'll start with the Rangers. It'll be a nice little segue for you, but Evan Carter has come alive in this postseason. It seems like every time you watch the game, he gets on base or he's making a great catch out in left.
Absolutely. And, left field in Houston is really tough to play. You have that very short wall that leads up to the Crawford boxes, and he made some tremendous grabs at the wall, some leaping plays that really robbed the Astros some extra base hits that would have led to some great scoring positions. But this is such a weird World Series, not mostly because of the Rangers, but because of the team from the National League. The Arizona Diamondbacks, winners of the NLCS in 7 games. They were down 0-2, they were down 3-2, and they won 2 games in a row at home, coming off of the back of an Alek Thomas home run in Game 4 to tie the game that they'd end up winning. They won the pennant for the first time since 2001. And it's the Diamondbacks, winners of only 84 games in the regular season. That's the fewest for a World Series participant since 2006, when the team that had that low record, the 83-78 St. Louis Cardinals, won the World Series against the heavily favored 95-win Detroit Tigers. And as you can see here, these are 2 teams that are no strangers to poor seasons. They're 212 combined losses in 2021, and here in 2023, they're playing for all the marbles.
It's just an incredible turnaround from both of these teams, but not only, it's just amazing to see both these teams, each with over 100 losses 2 years ago, to going to the World Series. And it just shows to the testament that they've had not only in the draft, but also making trades, signing free agents. They're kind of the blueprint for building a team almost from scratch.
Absolutely. The Rangers, they're the quintessential, I think, baseball team because they have the big free agency acquisitions, and the Diamondbacks are a little bit more of like an old school. They built a lot through the draft. They have their great starting pitching of Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly, but the rookie Brandon Pfaadt, he was outstanding in the NLCS. Here in the postseason as a whole, 4 starts, he went 16 and 2/3 innings pitched with a 22-3 strikeout to walk ratio and just a 2.70 ERA. But of course, it's been these starters go in 5 or 6 innings for the Diamondbacks, and normally you kind of want, especially in the postseason when the going gets tough, to gut out some 7 or 8 inning starts. But they've been able to turn the keys over to a tremendous bullpen. Luis Frias and Ryan Thompson both having sub 250 ERAs, but it's really been closer Paul Sewald and setup man Kevin Ginkel with one of the best names in baseball. Sewald, 11 strikeouts in only 8 innings with 6 saves. Ginkel, 0 ERA, 13 strikeouts in 9 appearances. And he had some great performances to keep the game keep the score what it was, to then turn it over to Paul Sewald as he had 5 holds in the NLCS just as a whole.
And you thought in that Game 7 in Philadelphia that the Phillies were going to string something together. They bring in Ginkel in the 7th, usually an 8th inning guy himself. Bring him in the 7th. He gets out of the jam, and the Diamondbacks are going to the World Series. Hard not to mention Corbin Carroll as well. He's been awesome for the Snakes, but JP, we're going to take a little trip back to college athletics, and the South Carolina and Clemson women's soccer teams, they're going to prepare for their respective postseasons after very successful regular seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite a great season for both of these teams. South Carolina, number 13 in the nation, 11-1-6, and Clemson, number 8, 13-1-4, and they're playing in 2 of the tougher conferences in women's college soccer. They were in action this week as both teams won on Sunday and then had some less than savory results last night. South Carolina unfortunately tying, which is not something we endorse on this show. We endorse winning and losing.
South Carolina has had a lot of ties this year, 6 on the season, 5 in conference play, but they are undefeated in SEC play. No losses, a couple draws, more than a couple, but putting together a very successful season. But Clemson fell last night 2-0 at Notre Dame, who's ranked 11th in the country. Both of their losses in the conference, one from that Notre Dame team, and the other one from number 1 ranked Florida State. They came in the preseason number 1, and the Seminoles are dominant.
Yeah, really one of the factories, I think, in soccer has been Florida State and Florida. Florida's been pretty good. And you see these teams, they're very experienced. South Carolina, 10 seniors or grad students on the roster. Clemson with 7. And I think it shows. You can see the leaders there on the bottom. And I think it's kind of interesting that these teams have allowed the same amount of goals this year.
Yeah, both playing a very nice defensive brand of soccer, but also they're able to cash in on the offensive end. Kat Berry, as you can see, does it all for the Gamecocks. The leader in goals, assists, as well as points. The senior leader, she's been talked about time year in and year out now as she's a senior. But it's going to be great to see these teams go into the postseason, and 2 teams in South Carolina getting a lot of success.
Absolutely, and that's all we've got for you today. We'll be right back after the break with this week's Pick'ems to wrap up another episode of Ball Don't Lie. Welcome back to BDL Pick'ems. I'm currently 13-4 on the season, while Spencer sits at a paltry 8-9. This week we have some interesting games. We're going to start out with one we talked about as the Clemson Tigers go on the road to Raleigh to take on the Wolfpack. Spencer, who do you got?
Yeah, this one's pretty easy for me. Give me the Tigers. I think they should have a better record than they do. We've already talked about that, but I just think they're a little more experienced, and NC State's offense, not only do they not move the chains, they sure don't move me. Give me the Tigers.
Yeah, this is a game worthy, I think, of the CW because this is going to be one of the more dreadful football games, I think, of the season. In terms of offense, I think Clemson wins. The ratings really like them, and they're a team that's, I think, going to get it together sooner rather than later because they have a big game coming next week. And staying in the ACC, we have a top 20 showdown as number 20 Duke goes on the road to number 18 Louisville. Spencer, these are 2 teams that control their destiny for the ACC championship. One of the biggest games for both of these teams in recent years.
Absolutely is, and all signs would point to the Cardinals, wouldn't it? Riley Leonard, not sure if they're going to play the home game for the Cardinals, but JP, I got to do this for my family today. A whole bunch of Duke legends. My grandfather recently passed away. He started the Duke trend in the whole family, so for him, give me the Blue Devils on the road.
Well, it's homecoming for Louisville. They have a pretty solid defense that loves to get after the passer, and if Leonard plays, he's going to be a little bit sore. Florida State knocked him around last weekend in Tallahassee, knocked him out of the game. But Louisville, not without injuries of their own, could be without star running back Jawar Jordan. So I think this game is really close. I think these teams trade haymakers back and forth. Mike Elko, coach of the Blue Devils, Jeff Brom, coach of the Cardinals, 2 of the best coaching jobs in the ACC. But I think Louisville gets it done late in what should be a thrilling matchup.
I'm really excited for that game, but JP, are you just itching to talk about this one? Pac-12 football. Number 8 Oregon hits the road to number 13 Utah. Who you got in this one, JP?
Well, it's tough because Utah last weekend went to Southern Cal with their pig farmer quarterback and took down the Trojans for the 3rd straight time. Can the pig farmer work his magic again against a team with an actual serious college football defense and a serious college football coach? I just don't know, man. Oregon's defense is special. You got Jordan James and Bucky Irving. I think that this game was close and low scoring. I think Oregon's offense is able to generate enough big plays to get into some red zone situations to kick some field goals. This one could be dreadful. It could be like a 13-6 type affair. But I think Oregon gets it done and wins on the road.
Yeah, that would probably make sense, but I'm going with my guys. Give me the Utes. I'm a big Kyle Whittingham fan. I think he's done just an excellent job. He gets nowhere near enough credit that he should get for just...
This is a team that's decimate. They have more injuries than South Carolina. Here they are, number 13 in the nation, hosting a top 10 team, hosting College Game Day.
They sure are, and I think they go back-to-back. I think Utah sneaks their way into the Pac-12 championship at the end of this year. We'll see after this week. That could completely fall apart. I'm not known for my pick'ems, but moving on, another game. We've got BYU at Texas. JP, who do you got out there in Austin?
Well, this game on paper shouldn't be very interesting. Quinn Ewers and the Longhorns have been outstanding this year, but Quinn Ewers out for a couple weeks with a shoulder injury, and BYU sneakily 5-2 on the year in their first year in the Big 12, coming off of a big win against Texas Tech. And I think that this game very well could be close. You could have some uneasy murmurings in the crowd in Austin. But I think Texas's talent, their defense, and their ability to establish the run is going to be able to just kind of salt away this one in a close Texas victory.
Yeah, I think Texas wins this one. I do think BYU's put together a really solid season so far. But even without Quinn Ewers, they should have a lot of... Texas still just has more talent. They should win if you just put hats on hats. They should win,
yeah,
I think.
Jimmys and Joes don't always translate in terms of the results. So, but in terms of... These are 2 Jimmy and Joes that we are quite familiar with as Gamecock fans, as the world's largest outdoor cocktail party takes place in Jacksonville. Number 1 Georgia against Florida, a Florida team that I can't decide how I feel about them.
They either look good or awful, but let me tell you, I mean, South Carolina should have beaten Florida. Let's go ahead and establish that. And if South Carolina should have beaten Florida, Georgia will beat Florida this weekend in Jacksonville.
Even without Brock Bowers for a couple weeks, as their star tight end suffered an unfortunate lower body injury, you know, Georgia's offense, I think it's reasonable to question how they'll move the ball against Florida's defense, but Graham Mertz against the dog defense is going to be something else, and I think Georgia wins big against Billy Napier and them Gators. But finishing it off here, capping this pick'em session with some Pac-12 action as a resurgent Arizona program hosts number 11 Oregon State. This is a sneaky Pac-12 After Dark masterclass on the rise.
It is, and Arizona's building a program from scratch. They were god-awful a couple years ago, but give me the Beavs. I feel like I've picked against them a couple too many times. I've done them dirty, but their offensive line is too dominant. They should run the ball all over Arizona.
And you know, Arizona, the SeatGeek sniper, Stallions.
Noted ties to Jed Fish.
Yeah, mentioned that Jed Fish, he helped him move into Arizona and claimed to have supreme roster control and coaching staff decisions. Arizona released a statement basically saying, who? So while I think that Arizona is a much improved team, despite the efforts of the Michigan Manifesto man himself, I think Oregon State is able to get a big win on the road in a game that is probably going to end up being pretty high scoring.
Yeah, I could agree with that one. And JP, this episode's been a blast, but this is going to be the end of this episode of Ball Don't Lie. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and even Facebook at SGTV at USC.
To keep up with all of our content, be sure to also visit us online at sgtv@usc.com. For SGTV, I'm JP Barry.
And I'm Spencer Ball. From all of us here at SGTV, have a great weekend, Carolina. Happy Halloween.
Forever to
Forever
thee.
to thee.